The plantation heiress gets letters from Europe until the stable slave removes his hat and says it's me. A young woman sits by lamplight, reading words that trouble her sleep and shake her faith in everything she's been taught. For months, elegant letters arrive from across the ocean, each one cutting deeper into her conscience like a blade finding bone. But when her suitor demands she read the correspondence aloud before the gathered crowd patrollers at the door, neighbors watching like hawks, the stable hand steps forward through the silence. His hat falls to the pine floor with a soft thud. 3 words change everything. Meanwhile, a small girl with a blue ribbon hums freedom songs while she sorts kindling, her perfect memory holding secrets that could save lives or damn them all. Storm clouds gather over the river. Dogs bay in the distance. A Bible holds scratched words in its margin that could rewrite the laws of the household. When the truth comes to light under courthouse eaves, will justice find its voice, or will the dawn bring chains and the sound of wagon wheels rolling south? Dawn crept across the Mississippi tidewater like honey through gauze, turning the plantation kitchen windows gold. Steam curled from the great iron kettle, where cornmeal bubbled thick and white. Eleanor Harrow slipped through the back door, her bare feet silent on the worn pine boards. The letter waited on the kitchen table, damp from the river crossing and smudged with morning mist. Monsieur Valet, Bordeaux, read the careful script. Eleanor's heart quickened as she broke the wax seal, still soft from its journey. The paper crackled between her fingers like autumn leaves. "My dear correspondent," the letter began, "your last words weigh heavy on my conscience. How can any soul rest easy knowing others suffer for want of simple mercy? The scriptures call us to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens." A small sound made Eleanor look up. In the corner by the woodbin, a girl no taller than the butter churn hummed a low melody. The child's dark fingers sorted kindling with practiced speed, but her voice carried the hymn with perfect pitch, each note clean as cathedral bells. Eleanor folded the letter quickly against her apron. The girl, Mary, they called her, wore a faded blue ribbon tied around her thin wrist like a bracelet. Her humming matched the tune Eleanor had been hearing in her head since the last letter arrived, the one that quoted Wade in the Water in careful French translation. "Morning, Miss Eleanor." Josiah's deep voice came from the doorway, where he waited for his daily portion of tack oil. His wide shoulders filled the frame, hands patient at his sides. "Morning." Eleanor's voice caught slightly. She pressed the letter deeper into her apron pocket, feeling the paper's edge leave a faint blue smear on the white cotton. Josiah's eyes found hers for just a moment, brown eyes that held something she couldn't name, something that reminded her of the careful handwriting in the letters, the precise arguments about mercy and justice that had been turning her world sideways these past months. "Oil's on the shelf," she said, though he knew this. He had been taking oil from that same shelf every morning for 15 years, since they were both children, and the world seemed fixed as the stars. "Thank you kindly." He moved past her to the shelf, his sleeve brushing the table's edge. Something in the way he moved careful, quiet made her wonder if he had seen the letter before she folded it away. Mary's humming rose slightly, the melody weaving around their awkward silence like thread through cloth. The child's ribbon caught the lamplight as she worked, the blue bright as forget-me-nots. The sound of boots on the front porch broke the spell. Eleanor's father, Mr. Harrow, was awake early again, his chest cough echoing through the house like a broken bellows. The cook, Aunt Scylla, bustled in from the pantry with molasses for the cornbread, her wooden spoon clicking against the crock. "Company coming today," Aunt Scylla announced, not looking at Eleanor. "Mr. Pike sent word he'll be here for dinner, says he has plans for the evening." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Mr. Pike had been calling regularly since spring, his intentions growing clearer with each visit. He was a good match on paper, owned 300 acres downriver, kept a fine house, commanded respect at the courthouse. But his laugh never reached his eyes, and he spoke of the field hands like they were cattle to be managed, nothing more. "Plans?" Eleanor asked. "Some kind of entertainment in the parlor. Reading," he said. "Ask special that you bring your correspondence box." Aunt Scylla's voice carried a warning. Everyone knew about Eleanor's letters from Europe, though no one knew their contents. Her father approved of the foreign connection. It made Eleanor seem refined, educated. But there had been questions lately about why no courtship emerged from such lengthy correspondence. Eleanor's hand moved to her pocket, where the letter rustled against her fingers. In the corner, Miri had stopped humming and watched with those sharp, dark eyes that seemed to catch everything. "I best be getting to the stables," Josiah said quietly. He lifted the oil bottle, giving Eleanor a small nod before stepping back into the morning light. When the door closed behind him, Eleanor pulled the letter out again, reading quickly. "The plantation system corrupts not merely those in bondage, but those who hold the bonds. I have seen too much cruelty justified by custom, too much suffering dismissed as natural order. Your heart knows this truth, I hear it in your words, growing stronger with each letter. The child you mentioned, the one who sings hymns while she works, does she not deserve the same future as any white child? Does not the stable hand who mends your horses deserve to read and write and choose his own path?" Eleanor's hands trembled. These were dangerous thoughts, made more dangerous by the truth they carried. In Charleston, they said, people had been tarred and feathered for lesser heresies, but Monsieur Vallée wrote with such clarity, such gentle force, that her conscience had awakened like a flower turning toward light. "Miss Eleanor?" Miri had approached silent as a cat, holding out a small bundle of fatwood for the stove. "You all right? You look peaked." "I'm fine." Eleanor tucked the letter away again. "That hymn you were humming, where did you learn it?" Miri's eyes went distant. "My mama sang it. Said it was about crossing over to the other side, where troubles can't find you." She paused, head tilted like a bird listening. "You been humming parts of it too." "Same melody." Eleanor stared at the child. How could Miri know the tune from a letter she couldn't read? Unless... The dinner bell rope shook once from the front hall, its brazen clang cutting through Eleanor's thoughts like an axe through kindling. The day was beginning in earnest, and tonight Mr. Pike would bring his plans to the parlor. Eleanor looked once more at Miri, who had returned to her wood sorting but whose ribbon gleamed like a signal in the lamplight. Whatever was coming, Eleanor sensed that the three of them herself, Josiah, and this sharp-eyed child, were bound together by something stronger than circumstance. The letter's edge had left that blue smear on her apron, marking her as surely as if she'd dipped her fingers in ink. The morning passed in a blur of preparations. Aunt Scylla kneaded bread with fierce concentration, while Eleanor helped polish the good silver and arrange wildflowers in the parlor. Her father coughed his way through breakfast, his face grey above his coffee cup. The plantation overseer, Mr. Bale, stopped by to report on the tobacco cutting, his pale eyes watching everything with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. "Your European friend still writing?" Bale asked casually, leaning against the kitchen doorframe. His smile never quite reached those pale eyes. "Occasionally," Eleanor kept her voice steady. "Curious thing, getting letters from overseas when no ship manifests show any passenger by that name. Makes a man wonder." Bale's fingers drummed against the doorframe. "Mr. Pike's mighty interested in meeting this mysterious correspondent." Eleanor's blood chilled, but she managed a shrug. "Perhaps Monsieur Vallée travels under different papers. European names can be complicated." Bale's smile widened. "Indeed they can. Indeed they can." After he left, Eleanor found herself watching the windows, following the movement of figures in the yard. Josiah worked near the stables, mending harness leather in the shade. Miri appeared and disappeared like a rabbit, fetching water, gathering eggs, always in motion, but never seeming hurried. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Mr. Pike arrived in his polished buggy, his brown beard freshly trimmed and his coat buttons gleaming. He brought with him two men. Eleanor didn't recognize patrollers by their look, with hard faces and coiled whips at their belts. Evening entertainment requires proper security, Pike explained to her father, who nodded weakly from his chair by the parlor window. "Never know who might be listening at doors when private letters are discussed." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "Private letters?" Pike's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Your correspondence, my dear. I thought the assembled company would enjoy hearing about your European friends' thoughts on our local customs. Quite educational, I'm sure." The parlor filled as evening fell. Field hands crowded the doorway, summoned by Pike's orders. House servants stood along the walls. The neighboring Caldwell family arrived with their grown sons, and old Judge Morrison settled his bulk into the best chair with a grunt of satisfaction. Eleanor sat rigid in her mother's rocking chair, the wooden correspondence box on her lap like a shield. Inside lay months of letters, each one more dangerous than the last. Her throat felt thick with fear. "Shall we begin?" Pike stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel like a preacher about to deliver judgment. "Miss Harrow has been corresponding with a European gentleman, Monsieur Vallet of Bordeaux. Fascinating insights into our southern way of life from a foreign perspective." The parlor clock ticked toward dusk as chairs scraped the pine floor into a circle. Lamplight flickered across expectant faces. Eleanor's hands shook as she lifted the lid of the correspondence box. "Perhaps we might start with the most recent letter." Pike's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Eleanor's fingers found the morning's letter, still carrying the faint scent of river water. She unfolded it slowly, buying time, her eyes scanning the dangerous words about loosing bonds and undoing heavy burdens. This is rather personal correspondence. Come now," Pike chided. "Nothing to hide from friends and neighbors. Read it clear so all can hear." The silence stretched tight as a fiddle string. Eleanor's vision blurred, the words swimming on the page. Around the room, faces watched with the hungry attention of spectators at a cockfight. Then, from the back of the room near the kitchen door, came a sound that made everyone turn. The scrape of a chair, the soft thud of boots on pine boards. Josiah stepped forward through the crowd, his shoulders straight and his head high. He stopped 3 paces from Eleanor's chair and slowly, deliberately, removed his hat. "It's me," he said, his voice carrying clear across the suddenly silent room. The words hit like a thunderclap. Eleanor's breath caught. Pike's face went white, then flushed red as sunset. In the corner by the kitchen door, Mary stood frozen, her ribbon-wrapped wrist pressed against her heart. "It's me," Josiah repeated, looking directly at Eleanor now. "I wrote those letters, been writing them for 8 months now. Learned my letters from a traveling preacher when I was 12, been reading ever since." The room exploded in gasps and murmurs. Someone laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. The patrollers' hands moved to their clubs, and Bale stepped forward from the shadows, his pale eyes bright with triumph. Eleanor stared at Josiah, understanding flooding through her like cold water. The careful handwriting, the precise arguments, the melody Mary hummed that matched the hymns quoted in the letters, all of it suddenly clear. "You," she whispered. Josiah nodded once. "Yes, miss. It was me all along." Pike's voice cracked like a whip. "This is impossible. Slaves can't what?" Josiah's brown eyes held Pike's stare without flinching. "Can't think? Can't feel? Can't see the difference between right and wrong?" The parlor had gone deadly quiet, except for the tick of the clock and the wheeze of Mr. Harrow's labored breathing. Hat in hand, Josiah stood under the parlor lamp, the flame shivering in the draught from the doorway. Eleanor felt the world tilting around her like a ship in heavy seas. Everything she thought she knew about Josiah, about herself, about the careful boundaries that defined their lives had just crumbled like sand. In the silence, Pike's voice rose cold and final as a judge pronouncing sentence. "I'll see you sold south by dawn, boy. This ends tonight." The parlor lamp flickered once and steadied, casting its light on faces frozen in shock. Outside, dogs began to howl in the distance, their voices carrying across the dark fields like a warning of the storm to come. The house settled into uneasy quiet after the parlor revelations, but sleep came to no one. Eleanor paced her bedroom floor while her father coughed and muttered in the next room. From the kitchen came the soft sounds of Aunt Scylla preparing bread for morning, though morning felt like a promise the night might not keep. In the small loft above the kitchen where Mary slept on a straw tick, the child lay awake listening to the sounds of conspiracy drifting up through the floorboards. Men's voices, Pike, Bale, the patrollers planning the morning's work with the efficiency of butchers. "South before sunrise," came Pike's voice. "I'll have papers drawn by Clark Donovan. Sale registered clean. This scandal ends with the sun." Mary pressed her ear to the floor crack. The blue ribbon around her wrist caught moonlight from the single window, bright as hope in the darkness. Her perfect pitch had been a gift since birth, but her perfect memory proved even more valuable. Every word, every melody, every scrap of overheard conversation lived in her mind like verses in a book. She remembered the lullaby her mother sang before fever took her. "Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd." for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom." The words had seemed like nonsense then, just comfort sounds in the dark. But listening to Josiah's letters read aloud, watching Eleanor's face change with each moral argument, Mary had begun to hear patterns. The hymn she hummed while sorting kindling wasn't just melody, it was a map. Wade in the water, children. God's gonna trouble the water. Each verse marked a crossing point, a safe house, a landmark along the river road, cypress knees that looked like praying hands, lantern lights that stayed steady all night, doors painted blue to signal sanctuary. Now, as boots creaked across the kitchen floor below and plans took shape for Josiah's sale, Mary understood why the songs mattered. Someone had to remember the roots. Someone had to carry the codes. She slipped from her pallet, bare feet silent on the wooden ladder. The kitchen was empty, except for shadows and the dying embers of the cook stove. Through the window, she could see light in the stable, where they'd locked Josiah for the night. Pike's men stood guard, their rifles gleaming in the lamplight. Mary crept to the pantry, where Aunt Scylla kept her herb stores. Behind the mason jars of dried sage and sassafras root, hidden in an old tea tin, lay something precious, a folded paper with drawings that matched the hymn verses. Her mother had left it, wrapped in oilcloth, with instructions whispered on her deathbed. "River map," her mother had said, breath thin as spider silk. Cypress knees like praying hands mark the deep crossing. 3 lanterns steady at Pearson's dock. Blue door at the Quaker house, 10 miles downstream. Follow the drinking gourd north. Mary unfolded the paper carefully. The drawings were simple but clear landmarks along the river, coded in the same pattern as the freedom songs. She'd been too young to understand before, but now the meaning blazed clear as torchlight. Footsteps on the porch made her fold the map quickly. Eleanor entered through the back door, her nightgown ghostly white in the darkness, her hair hanging loose around her shoulders. "Mary, what are you doing awake?" The child stepped out of the shadows, the blue ribbon on her wrist, catching what little light filtered through the window. "Can't sleep. Too much trouble in the air." Eleanor knelt beside her, and Mary saw tears tracking silver down the white woman's cheeks. "I never knew. All those months, I never suspected it was Josiah writing those letters." "He learned his letters from the traveling preacher," Mary said softly. "Brother Samuel came through here 5 winters back. Josiah was already grown, but he sat in the back of the barn every night, practicing with a stick in the dirt." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You remember that? I remember everything." Mary's voice was matter-of-fact, the way some people might mention brown eyes or left-handedness. "Every song, every story, every word folks think I'm too little to understand." From the stable came the sound of voices, Pike arguing with one, of the patrollers about timing, Bale insisting they move before dawn to avoid interference from Judge Morrison, who was known to be soft on certain matters. Eleanor gripped Mary's small hands. "They mean to sell him south. Chain gangs in Georgia, maybe worse. I have to do something, but I don't know what. My father won't stand against Pike, and the law." "Law's not the only kind of justice," Mary said quietly. She pulled the river map from her pocket, unfolding it on the kitchen table. "My mama left me this. It matches the freedom songs, verse by verse. Routes to follow if trouble comes." Eleanor studied the simple drawings, cypress knees, lantern markers, the blue door that signaled sanctuary. "This is a map of the Underground Railroad," Mary nodded. "Been running right under everyone's noses for years. Folks think the songs are just comfort, but they're directions. Wade in the water means follow the river to hide your scent from the dogs. Follow the drinking gourd means head north by the North Star." A crash from upstairs made them both freeze. Mr. Harrow's coughing had turned violent. His breathing labored as a broken bellows. Eleanor ran toward the stairs, but Mary caught her arm. "Wait. I know what to do for his chest fever. Seen the doctor work on it before." They climbed the stairs together, finding Mr. Harrow propped against his pillows, his face grey and his lips tinged blue. Eleanor wrung her hands helplessly, but Mary moved with calm purpose to the washstand. "Hot water and salt," she directed. "Steam to open his chest, and fetch that little brown bottle from Dr. Keene's bag, the one with the bitter smell." Eleanor obeyed without question, watching in amazement as Mary mixed the remedy with steady hands. The child had clearly observed the doctor's methods during past visits, filing away every detail in that perfect memory. "Breathe deep, Mr. Harrow," Mary said gently, holding the steaming basin near his face. "Like you're drinking the air, slow and steady." The old man's breathing gradually eased, his color improving as the medicine took hold. He looked at Mary with new awareness, recognizing perhaps for the first time the sharp intelligence behind her quiet manner. You did that better than Doc Keene," he wheezed. Mary ducked her head modestly. "Just watched and remembered, sir." "Downstairs," the plotting continued. Pike's voice carried up through the floorboards, outlining his plans with military precision. "Wagon ready at dawn, papers signed and sealed. I want that boy on the river road before Judge Morrison takes his morning coffee. Mr." Harrow struggled to sit up straighter. "Eleanor, what's all this about papers?" "What papers?" Eleanor exchanged a glance with Mary, then told her father everything about the letters, the parlor revelation, Pike's intention to sell Josiah South as punishment for his audacity. Mr. Harrow's breathing grew labored again, but from emotion, now rather than illness. "Josiah, that boy's been on this place since he was 10 years old. Helped birth every foal, mended every fence. Papa, we have to help him." Eleanor's voice carried desperate urgency. "There has to be something, some legal way to stop this." The old man closed his eyes, thinking. When he opened them again, they held a spark of memory. Your mother. She kept papers, private papers in her Bible, said they were, for a time when justice needed help finding its way. Eleanor leaned forward. "What kind of papers?" "Manumission documents. Freedom papers for the household staff, drawn up legal but never filed," she said. She said when the time came, I'd know what to do with them. Mary's ribbon-wrapped wrist pressed against her heart. "Where's the Bible, sir?" "Downstairs, church basement trunk, wrapped in her wedding quilt. But the papers might be water-damaged by now, and without proper seals." "Seals can be replaced," Mary said quietly, "if you know where to look for the right wax and the proper ring." Eleanor stared at the child. "You know about legal seals?" "I know about everything that happens in this house," Mary replied simply, "including where your mama kept her private seal and ring. Been keeping them safe all this time, waiting for need." From outside came the sound of wagon wheels on gravel and the jingle of harness metal. Pike's men were preparing for the morning's transport, their voices carrying the casual brutality of men accustomed to trading in human misery. "Mr. Harrow gripped Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. "If your mother left those papers, if they can be made legal, then maybe justice has been waiting all along for someone brave enough to use it." Eleanor looked at Mary, seeing in the child's dark eyes the steady flame of purpose that had guided generations of her people through darkness toward light. The blue ribbon on her wrist seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, marking time like a freedom song. "Show me," Eleanor whispered. They crept downstairs through shadows thick as velvet, avoiding the kitchen where Pike's men still plotted over coffee and tobacco. The church basement lay across the yard, past the stable where Josiah waited under guard, past the kennel where hunting dogs dozed fitfully. Mary led them along paths she knew by heart, her bare feet finding solid ground even in darkness. The child moved like water, flowing around obstacles without disturbing so much as a pebble. Eleanor followed, her nightgown snagging on thorns and her heart hammering against her ribs. The church basement smelled of dust and old wood, cedar chests and forgotten prayers. Mary lit a candle stub with flint and steel, the flame casting wavering shadows across trunks and quilts and the accumulated memories of 3 generations. In the corner, wrapped in faded silk, lay Eleanor's mother's Bible-thin paper soft as moth wings, gilt edges worn to silver. Mary opened it with reverent hands, her perfect memory guiding her to the exact page where someone had scratched tiny words in the margin. "Here," she whispered, pointing to marks so faint they looked like accidental scratches. "Needle writing, pressed deep but small. Look close." Eleanor squinted at the marks, gradually making out words. "Upon Josiah's 25th year, or sooner should conscience demand. Full manumission granted by seal of Mary Catherine Harrow. Witnessed by God and law." Eleanor's breath caught. When is Josiah's 25th birthday?" 3 months past," Mary said quietly. "Been free by your mama's will since summer started." Just nobody knew to look. The implications hit Eleanor like cold water. Not only had Josiah written the letters that awakened her conscience, he had done so as a legally free man, if only they could prove it. A sound outside made them freeze, footsteps on gravel, the low murmur of voices. Pike's men were making rounds, checking security before the morning's departure. "We need the seal and wax," Eleanor whispered urgently. Mary nodded, closing the Bible carefully. "Your mama's room, behind the loose board in the wardrobe, but we'll need help getting there without being seen." They blew out the candle and waited for the footsteps to pass. In the darkness, Eleanor felt the weight of her mother's hidden justice pressing against her chest like a living thing. Somewhere across the yard, Josiah waited in chains for a dawn that would carry him away from everything he'd ever known. But dawn was still hours away, and in the darkness before morning, 3 generations of women, one dead, one desperate, one determined, had left a trail of breadcrumbs for justice to follow. The blue ribbon on Mary's wrist caught starlight as they crept back toward the house, carrying hope wrapped in ancient paper and sealed with a mother's love. They reached the main house as the first patrol finished their circuit. Mary led Eleanor up the back stairs, each step carefully placed to avoid the boards that creaked. The child's perfect memory included every loose nail and warped plank, every shadow that might hide them from watching eyes. Eleanor's mother's room had been locked since her death 3 years ago, but Mary produced a key from her pocket, one of many secrets the child had hoarded like a magpie collecting shiny things. "Been keeping it safe," she whispered, turning the lock with barely a click. The room still held traces of lavender water and rose petals, scents that made Eleanor's throat tight with grief. Mary Catherine Harrow had been ahead of her time in many ways, educated beyond most women, compassionate beyond the boundaries of her class. Her husband had indulged what he called her gentle enthusiasms, never guessing how deep her convictions ran. Mary went straight to the wardrobe, her small fingers finding the loose board Eleanor had never noticed. Behind it lay a shallow compartment containing a ring of unusual design, silver, set with a cornelian stone carved with the initials M.C.H. and a stick of sealing wax, red as heart's blood. She used this for her private correspondence, Mary explained softly. Letters to abolition societies up north, friends who shared her feelings about slavery. "Your papa never knew." Eleanor turned the ring over in her palm, feeling the weight of her mother's secret convictions. "How do you know all this?" "I was her shadow for 2 years before she died. She taught me to read, taught me numbers, taught me to see past what folks wanted me to see." Mary's eyes held depths Eleanor was only beginning to understand. "Said someday I might need to carry messages that mattered." A sound from the hall made them both freeze, boots on the runner, heading their way. Eleanor quickly pocketed the ring and wax while Mary replaced the board and closed the wardrobe. They barely made it back to the basement before Bale appeared in the doorway, his pale eyes scanning the darkness. "Thought I heard voices down here," he said, lamp held high. Eleanor stepped into the light, trying to look casual despite her nightgown and bare feet. "Couldn't sleep. Came looking for my mother's prayer book." Bale's smile was thin as a blade. "Mighty convenient time for prayers, Miss Eleanor. What with your stable boy facing judgment come morning, perhaps that's exactly when prayers are needed most." Bale studied her face for a long moment, then shrugged. "Pray all you like. Won't change what's coming with the sun." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Miss Eleanor, Mr. Pike asked me to mention he'll be wanting that correspondence box of yours. All those letters from your European friend. Says they'll make interesting evidence at the courthouse about what kind of influences you've been under." After he left, Eleanor sagged against the trunk that held her mother's quilts. The ring in her pocket felt heavy as a millstone, and the wax stick seemed to burn against her palm through the cotton. "We have to move tonight," she whispered. Mary nodded. "I know a way to the stable that avoids the guards, but getting Josiah out won't be enough. They'll follow us with dogs and without proper papers. The Bible margin won't be enough? Not without a witness who can swear to your mama's handwriting, someone who saw her make the mark." Mary's ribbon caught candlelight as she twisted it around her finger. "But I know where to find such a person." Eleanor waited, learning to trust the child's endless store of carefully hoarded knowledge. "Brother Samuel," Mary continued, "the preacher who taught Josiah his letters. He's been traveling the river circuit for years, marrying folks and blessing babies and—" and helping people find their way to freedom when need arises. Where is he now? Quinn's Landing, 10 miles downstream, holds service there every Sunday. Miri's perfect memory called up details like pages from a book. But the river's running high from last week's rain, and the ferry ropes snapped in yesterday's wind. Only way across is by skiff, and only one man I know willing to make that crossing in the dark. Eleanor felt pieces clicking together in her mind like tumblers in a lock. The boatman. The one who brings my letters. Miri's smile was quick and knowing. Samuel's been carrying more than mail on his river runs. Letters, messages, sometimes people who need to disappear for a while. She paused, listening to sounds from upstairs, Pike's men bedding down in the parlor, their rifles close at hand. But we'll need a distraction to get past the guards, and we'll need someone who can forge traveling papers good enough to fool patrollers. Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, discarding one plan after another. Too risky, too complicated, too many chances for failure. Then she remembered something, a detail from one of Josiah's letters that had puzzled her at the time. Josiah mentioned traveling papers in one of his letters, said he'd seen forged passes and knew how to spot the differences. More than that, Miri said quietly. He's been making practice copies, learning the clerk's handwriting and seal impressions, just in case. Eleanor stared at the child. How do you know that? Because I've been watching him practice. Late at night in the tack room, by candlelight, copying every document that passes through Mr. Bale's hands. Miri's voice carried a note of pride. Josiah's not just book-learned, Miss Eleanor. He's been preparing for freedom a long time, one skill at a time. The implications sent hope flooding through Eleanor's chest. Not only was Josiah legally free by her mother's will, he had the knowledge and skill to help others claim their freedom too. Then we get him out tonight, Eleanor said firmly. And we take that knowledge with us. Miri nodded, then tilted her head like a bird listening to distant music. Storm's coming. Can smell it in the air. Feel it in my bones. Rain by midnight. Heavy weather after. Eleanor looked toward the basement window, seeing nothing but clear stars. But she had learned to trust Miri's instincts, which seemed to operate by rules deeper than ordinary observation. Will that help or hurt us? Both. Miri's ribbon twisted around her finger as she thought. Rain will wash out our scent, make it harder for dogs to track, but it'll also turn the roads to mud, slow down any wagon travel. Then we go by water. Rivers dangerous in flood stage. Lost 2 boats just last month when the current ran wild. Eleanor felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a mantle. Every choice carried risk. Every delay increased the chance of discovery. But somewhere in the darkness between fear and hope lay a path that might lead to justice. Miri, she said quietly, do you trust me? The child's dark eyes studied Eleanor's face for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the careful, deferential smile she wore around white folks, but something deeper and more real. I trust that you're learning to see past what you were taught to see, she said, and I trust that sometimes the best plans come from the heart instead of the head. Eleanor nodded, feeling something shift inside her chest like a door opening after years of being locked. Then let's go save Josiah, and may God help us all. Outside, the first drops of rain began to patter against the basement windows, and in the distance, thunder rolled across the dark water like the sound of freedom trains heading north. Rain came with the fury of divine judgment, lashing the plantation like a cat-o' nine tails. Eleanor and Miri crept through the downpour toward the stable, their clothes soaked through before they'd crossed the yard. Water streamed from the eaves in silver curtains, and lightning split the sky with knife-blade brightness. The guards had taken shelter in the tack room, their rifles propped against the wall while they played cards by lantern light. Through the rain-blurred window, Eleanor could see Josiah in the back stall, shackled but alert, his eyes reflecting the storm's intermittent flashes. Miri tugged Eleanor's sleeve and pointed to a loose board in the stable's back wall, a board she'd apparently loosened earlier during one of her many errands. The child thought of everything, prepared for possibilities that hadn't yet occurred to anyone else. They squeezed through the gap into the stable's warm darkness. Horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, spooked by thunder and the scent of approaching weather. Eleanor felt her way along the familiar walls, while Miri moved with the confidence of someone who could navigate by sound and touch alone. Josiah looked up as they approached his stall, his eyes widening in the lightning's intermittent glow. "Miss Eleanor? What are you—" "Hush!" Eleanor fumbled with the lock on his shackles, her hands shaking from cold and nerves. "We're getting you out of here. Papers." Josiah whispered urgently. "Any escape plan needs proper traveling papers, or we won't make it 10 miles before they catch us." Miri stepped closer, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Already thought of that. But first we need to reach Brother Samuel at Quinn's Landing. He can witness the Bible margin, make it legal." Josiah's eyes sharpened. "The boatman Samuel? He's been carrying my letters all this time, hasn't he?" Eleanor nodded, still working on the lock. The metal was cold and slippery in her wet hands, the mechanism stubborn as mule. "He's more than just a mail carrier, it seems. Much more." Josiah's voice carried a note of deep respect. "Samuel's been guiding folks to freedom for near 20 years. Lost 3 fingers to a slave catcher's trap, still kept rowing his boat." The lock finally clicked open. Josiah rubbed his wrists where the iron had chafed, then stood carefully, testing his balance after hours in chains. From the tack room came the sound of laughter and the clink of coins, the guards still absorbed in their card game. But Eleanor knew their luck wouldn't hold much longer. Pike had ordered hourly checks, and the next one was due soon. "How do we get to the landing without being seen?" Eleanor whispered. Miri was already moving toward a corner where saddles and harness gear hung from wooden pegs. She pulled aside a horse blanket to reveal a small rowboat, barely big enough for 3 people. "Been keeping this here for emergencies," she explained. "Creek runs behind the tobacco barn, connects to the main river about a mile downstream from the ferry crossing." Josiah examined the boat with practiced eyes. "She'll hold, but in this storm, water's going to be rough as a bucking horse." Eleanor looked between them, the man whose words had awakened her conscience, the child whose perfect memory held the keys to their survival. Both of them were risking everything to trust her, a white woman who'd lived her whole life insulated from the realities they faced daily. "I can't promise we'll make it," she said honestly, "but I can promise that if we don't try, Josiah will be sold south by morning, and nothing will change." Lightning illuminated their faces in stark black and white, 3 souls bound together by circumstance and choice, standing at the edge of a precipice that would either destroy them or set them free. Miri grabbed a coil of rope from a saddle hook. Josiah lifted one end of the boat, while Eleanor took the other. Together they maneuvered it through the loose board and into the storm. The creek ran higher than any of them had ever seen it, chocolate-brown water rushing toward the main river with debris from upstream farms. Tree branches and fence posts tumbled past like driftwood in a flood tide. "Current's going to carry us fast," Josiah warned, steadying the boat while Eleanor and Miri climbed in. "Won't be much chance to steer once we're in the main channel." Miri took her position in the bow, her ribbon-wrapped wrist gleaming wet in the lightning flashes. "I know the way," she said with quiet confidence. "Him says wade in the water to hide your trail. River knows how to keep secrets." Josiah pushed off, and the current grabbed them like a giant hand. The little boat spun once, twice, then straightened as Josiah found his rhythm with the oars. Eleanor gripped the sides, her knuckles white as bone, while water sloshed around their feet. Behind them, the plantation fell away into rain and darkness. Ahead lay Quinn's Landing and Brother Samuel, if they could reach him alive. Between stretched miles of flood-swollen river and the very real possibility that they would all 3 drown before dawn brought Pike's vengeance. "Sing," Miri called over the storm's roar. "River likes music, helps it remember which way to flow." Eleanor thought the child had lost her senses until Miri's voice rose clear and true above the thunder. "Wade in the water, wade in. The water children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." Josiah joined in, his deep bass harmonizing with Miri's soprano. "Jordan's water is chilly and cold. God's gonna trouble the water. It chills the body but not the soul. God's gonna trouble the water." Eleanor found her voice adding to theirs, the melody pulling them together like a rope in the storm. And somehow, whether by miracle or simply the power of human voices raised in common cause, the river seemed to respond. The current smoothed slightly, carrying them downstream with less violence, as if the water itself recognized the freedom song and chose to help rather than hinder. They rode the flood tide for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Lightning showed them landmarks, Mary called out from memory, a lightning-split oak, a barn with one wall missing, a church steeple rising from what was now an island of higher ground. There, Mary pointed through the rain at a cluster of lights barely visible through the storm. Quinn's Landing. But the docks underwater will have to beach on the sandbar. Josiah angled the boat toward shore, fighting the current that wanted to carry them past their destination. Eleanor could see a figure with a lantern moving among the lights, someone waiting, watching for travelers who might need help on such a night. The boat scraped bottom with a grinding sound that made Eleanor's teeth ache. Josiah jumped out, waist-deep in rushing water, and dragged them up onto what passed for dry land. The figure with the lantern approached, and Eleanor saw an elderly black man with graying whiskers and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Brother Samuel," Mary called out, her voice carrying relief and recognition. Samuel held his lantern high, studying their bedraggled group with the calm assessment of someone accustomed to midnight emergencies. "Lord have mercy," he said quietly. "What's got you three traveling in weather fit to drown the devil himself?" "Justice," Eleanor said simply. "And time running short," Samuel nodded, as if this explanation was perfectly adequate. "Come on then, church is dry, and I've got coffee on the stove. We can sort out the rest once you've warmed up some." He led them up a muddy path to a small church that looked ready to blow away in the next strong wind. But inside was warm and dry, with a pot-bellied stove throwing heat and the smell of coffee that made Eleanor realize she hadn't eaten since noon. Samuel poured coffee into tin cups while they explained their situation, the revealed letters, Pike's plan for Josiah's sale, the Bible margin with its needle-scratched manumission clause. "Show me," Samuel said when Eleanor produced the thin paper Bible. He examined the margin writing with a magnifying glass, his fingers tracing the faint marks with the delicacy of a surgeon. "Mary Catherine's hand. Sure enough. I married her to your father, blessed their household more than once. This is legal scripture, properly witnessed." Eleanor's heart leaped. "Then Josiah is free? By rights, yes. But rights and reality don't always shake hands, especially when you're dealing with folks like Pike who see profit in human misery." Samuel set down the glass, his expression thoughtful. "You'll need this properly sealed and registered to make it stick in court." Mary pulled Eleanor's mother's ring from her pocket, along with the red sealing wax. "We brought these." Samuel examined the ring with obvious recognition. "Mary Catherine's private seal. She used this on more letters than most folks would guess." He looked at Eleanor with new respect. "You willing to follow in her footsteps, child? Because once this seal goes on paper, there's no taking it back." Eleanor thought of all the letters Josiah had written, all the moral arguments that had slowly awakened her conscience to truths she'd been raised to ignore. She thought of Mary's perfect memory holding generations of freedom songs, and of her mother's hidden justice waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. "I'm willing." Samuel warmed the wax over his lantern flame, while Mary held the Bible open to the proper page. When the wax was soft and red as fresh blood, Samuel pressed the seal firmly against the margin beside the scratched words. The impression was perfect. M.C.H., surrounded by a circle of tiny stars, as official as any courthouse document. Samuel signed his name as witness in careful script, then handed Eleanor a quill. "Your signature makes it complete," he said gently. "Owner's acknowledgement of her mother's will." Eleanor dipped the quill in ink that seemed to hold the weight of history. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "Eleanor Mary Harrow," below Samuel's witness signature, but the letters came out clear and strong. "There," Samuel said, blowing gently on the wet ink. "One free man, legal as Sunday morning." But even as relief flooded through Eleanor, she heard sounds outside that made her blood turn, cold horses' hooves on wet ground, the bay of tracking dogs, voices raised in command and pursuit. "They followed us," Josiah said grimly, moving to the window. Through the rain-blurred glass, Eleanor could see torches bobbing like angry fireflies, riders spreading out to surround the church. Pike's voice carried above the storm, ordering his men to positions. "Nowhere to run," Samuel said calmly, as if cornered fugitives were a common occurrence in his church. But sometimes the Lord provides a different kind of escape. He moved to the pulpit and pulled out what looked like an account ledger, its pages yellowed with age. "Been keeping records for 20 years, he explained, opening the book. Every marriage, every baptism, every other service I've provided for folks in need. Eleanor saw pages of careful entries, names and dates, and cryptic notations that suggested Brother Samuel's ministry extended far beyond conventional preaching. What kind of records? Samuel's finger traced down a column of entries until he found what he was looking for. Here, Bale, overseer. Shows he's been taking bribes to forge traveling passes, skimming money from plantation supplies, even selling people off the books and keeping the profit. Josiah leaned closer, his eyes scanning the damning evidence. How did you? Folks talk to preachers, Samuel said simply. Tell secrets they wouldn't tell their own mothers. I write down what might matter someday when justice needs a helping hand. Outside, Pike's voice rose in command. Surround the building. They're trapped like rats. Eleanor felt despair closing around her heart like cold water. Even with Josiah's freedom papers, even with evidence of Bale's corruption, they were still outnumbered and outgunned. Then Mary stepped forward, her ribbon bright in the lamplight. Brother Samuel, she said quietly, you remember the old preacher who used to work this circuit? The one with the special way of marrying folks? Samuel's eyes crinkled with understanding. Hand fasting, old Celtic way, binding but not necessarily permanent. Why? Mary looked between Eleanor and Josiah, her dark eyes holding depths of wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young. Because if Miss Eleanor and Josiah were married, legally wed by a preacher with witnesses, then any sale would be breaking up a Christian marriage. Even Pike would have trouble explaining that to a judge. Eleanor felt her heart stop, then start again with thunderous force. The implications crashed over her like the storm outside: social ruin, family disgrace, a crossing of lines that could never be uncrossed. She looked at Josiah, seeing in his eyes the same recognition of what Mary was proposing, not just a marriage of convenience, but a complete overturning of everything their world held sacred and separate. Eleanor, Josiah said softly, you don't have to. Yes, she interrupted, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. Yes, I do. Outside, Pike's men were taking positions. Inside, 3 people stood around a Bible and a seal, while a 4th prepared to perform a ceremony that would reshape more than just their individual fates. Join hands, Samuel said, his voice carrying the authority of both law and scripture. Eleanor's fingers found Josiah's, and Mary placed her small hands over both of theirs like a blessing. The red wax seal caught lamplight, and outside the storm raged on while inside, love found a way to claim its own freedom. We are gathered in the sight of God and witnesses, Brother Samuel began, his voice carrying over the storm's fury and the sound of Pike's men positioning themselves outside. His words held the weight of centuries, the same phrases that had bound couples together since time immemorial, regardless of color or circumstance. Eleanor felt Josiah's hands trembling slightly in hers, or perhaps the trembling was her own. Behind them, Mary stood, as witness, her ribbon-wrapped wrist catching the lamplight like a promise kept across generations. Do you, Josiah, take Eleanor to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Josiah's voice came clear and strong. I do. Do you, Eleanor, take Josiah to be your lawfully wedded husband? The church door exploded inward with a crash of splintered wood. Pike stormed in, rain streaming from his coat and fury blazing in his eyes. Behind him came Bale and 2 patrollers, their rifles raised and ready. Step away from that man. Pike's voice cracked like a whip. This charade ends now. Eleanor didn't move, her hands still clasped with Josiah's. We are in the middle of a Christian ceremony, mister. Pike, even you wouldn't interrupt a wedding. Pike's laugh was harsh as broken glass. Wedding? Between a white woman and a slave? That's not marriage, that's abomination. Free man, Samuel corrected quietly, holding up the Bible with its sealed margin clause. Josiah was manumitted by Eleanor's mother 3 months ago, legal and binding. Bale stepped forward, his pale eyes scanning the pages. Let me see that. Samuel held the book steady, while Bale examined the seal and signatures. Eleanor watched the overseer's face change as he realized the implications not just of Josiah's freedom, but of what his treatment of a free man might mean in court. "Forgery?" Bale said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Easy enough to fake an old seal, scratch some words in a margin." Samuel smiled and pulled out his record ledger, opening it to a page near the middle. "Funny thing about forgeries, Mr. Bale, they tend to run in patterns, like these traveling passes you've been making, the ones with the crooked serif on the county seal." Bale's face went white as milk. "You can't prove." "Can prove more than that," Miri interrupted, her young voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, one of the passes Bale had used to move people around the county. "This G in Georgia leans wrong. Real county seal has a straight serif, but yours curves like a snake's back." Eleanor watched as understanding dawned on Pike's face. If Bale had been forging documents, if his corruption was exposed, then any sale he'd arranged might be voided. The legal complications alone could tie up Pike's plans for months. "Even if the boy is free," Pike said desperately, "this marriage is still invalid. Mixed unions aren't legal in Mississippi." "Hand fasting is," Samuel replied calmly, "old law, older than state statutes. Binding for a year and a day, recognized by English common law that still applies in certain circumstances." One of the patrollers shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Pike, if there's questions about the legality, there are no questions." Pike's control was slipping, his voice rising to near hysteria. "I don't care what papers they wave around, what ceremonies they perform. That man belongs to me by right of purchase and debt." "What debt?" Eleanor asked sharply. Pike pulled a document from his coat, rain-spotted but still legible. "Your father owes me $1,200 in loans and crop advances. Payment was due last month. I'm taking the boy in settlement." Eleanor felt her heart sink. Her father's debts were real enough. The plantation had struggled since her mother's death, crops failing and expenses mounting. If Pike held valid notes— "Let me see that," Samuel said, extending his hand for the document. Pike hesitated, then handed it over. Samuel examined the paper carefully, his finger tracing the columns of figures. After a long moment, he looked up with something that might have been amusement. "Interesting arithmetic, Mr. Pike. According to this ledger here," he pulled out Bale's hidden account book, "you've already collected payment on these same debts. Twice, in some cases." Eleanor watched Pike's face cycle through confusion, understanding, and fury. "That ledger is stolen property. Evidence," Samuel corrected, "shows you and Bale have been running a profitable side business, collecting on phantom debts while skimming profits from estate sales." The church had gone deadly quiet, except for rain drumming on the roof and the wheeze of wind through broken timbers. Eleanor could feel the balance of power shifting, like tide turning in their favor. But Pike wasn't finished. His hand moved to the pistol at his belt, and his voice turned deadly calm. "Evidence can be destroyed. Witnesses can disappear. Accidents happen on stormy nights." That's when the church door opened again, and Judge Morrison stepped in out of the rain. Eleanor had never been so glad to see the old man's portly figure and stern face. He surveyed the scene, the interrupted wedding, the drawn weapons, the scattered papers and accusations, with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much human folly in his years on the bench. "Mr. Pike," he said mildly, "I believe you missed our appointment this morning." Pike lowered his pistol, confusion evident in his face. "What appointment? The one where you explain why you've been filing false debt claims in my court, taking payment on accounts already settled." Judge Morrison accepted a cup of coffee from Samuel's ever-ready pot. "Had an interesting conversation with your banker this morning. Seems there's some question about where certain funds have been deposited." Eleanor watched Pike's bravado crumble like sand. Without Bale's forged papers and fraudulent records, his whole scheme was collapsing. The debts he'd claimed against the plantation were either paid or imaginary, and his treatment of legally free people was beginning to look like kidnapping. "Now then," Judge Morrison continued, settling his bulk on one of the church pews, "I understand there's been a wedding ceremony in progress. Brother Samuel, perhaps you'd like to finish what you started." Samuel nodded, reopening his worn prayer book. Pike started to protest, but Judge Morrison silenced him with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "Do you, Eleanor, take Josiah to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part. Eleanor looked into Josiah's brown eyes and saw there all the gentle wisdom that had spoken to her conscience through months of letters. She saw the man who had risked everything to tell her the truth, who had awakened her heart to justice and mercy. "I do," she said clearly. "By the power vested in me by God and the state of Mississippi, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Samuel smiled as he closed the prayer book. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Judge Morrison stood, brushing rainwater from his coat. "Well then, that settles the legal questions quite nicely. Mr. Pike, I'll expect you in my chambers Monday morning to explain these irregular debt claims. Mr. Bale, you'll be coming with me tonight to discuss your creative approach to document preparation." Pike made one last desperate attempt. "You can't let this stand." "A white woman married to a free man," Judge Morrison interrupted, "in a ceremony performed by a licensed minister with proper witnesses. The marriage is valid, Mr. Pike. Your objections are noted and overruled." Eleanor felt something break loose in her chest, a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying, made up of shame and fear and the crushing pressure of expectations she'd never chosen. In its place grew something light and strong, like a song rising from deep water. Mary stepped forward, her ribbon bright in the lamplight, and offered Eleanor her hand. "Come on," she said with a smile that held all the wisdom of her years and all the hope of her future. "Let's go home." But Judge Morrison held up a hand. "One more matter to settle. Young Mary, I understand you've shown considerable skill in identifying fraudulent documents." The child nodded, suddenly serious. "The county clerk's position includes a deputy post, traditionally filled by someone with keen eyes and a good memory. The salary isn't much, but it includes schooling privileges and a cottage by the courthouse." He studied Mary's face with obvious approval. "Interested?" Eleanor felt her heart overflow as she watched Mary's face light up like a sunrise. The child had spent her life watching and remembering, cataloguing injustices and keeping secrets. Now she would have the power to help ensure that justice was recorded properly, that the system served truth instead of hiding it. "Yes, sir," Mary said simply. "I'd be honored." The storm was breaking as they left the church, rain gentling to a steady patter and wind dropping to whisper through the trees. Samuel walked them to the landing, where his boat waited to carry them, back upstream to whatever new life awaited. Eleanor sat beside Josiah in the bow, their hands intertwined, while Mary took the stern position with her perfect memory, guiding them through channels she knew by heart. Behind them, Judge Morrison supervised Pike and Bale's escort to the county jail, their schemes unraveled by a child's sharp eyes and a preacher's patient record-keeping. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, as they glided through calm water under clearing stars. Josiah squeezed her hand gently. "Now we learn to live free, all of us." The plantation looked different as they approached the familiar landing, not smaller, exactly, but somehow less imposing. The big house was still grand, the field still stretched to the horizon, but the weight of its authority had shifted. It was still home, but home on new terms, with new rules written by conscience instead of custom. Eleanor's father waited on the porch, wrapped in quilts and propped in his chair despite the late hour. His face was grey with exhaustion and worry, but his eyes held something Eleanor hadn't seen in years, a glimmer of the man her mother had married, before duty and convention had worn him down to a shadow of his former self. "Eleanor," he called as they approached. "Thank God you're safe." She climbed the porch steps with Josiah beside her, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. "Papa, I'd like you to meet your new son-in-law." Mr. Harrow studied Josiah's face for a long moment, then slowly extended his hand. "I knew your grandmother," he said quietly. "Sarah was a good woman, wise in ways I was too young to appreciate. I see her wisdom in your letters." Eleanor felt tears she hadn't expected burning behind her eyes. Her father had known all along who was writing those letters, had perhaps even approved in his quiet way. The knowledge that he had supported her conscience, even when he couldn't openly defy convention, filled her with a gratitude too deep for words. "The overseer position is vacant, Mr. Harrow continued, looking at Josiah. "The pay is fair, the work is honest, and the decisions about how people are treated will be yours to make." Josiah nodded solemnly. I'll do my best to deserve the trust. I know you will. Mr. Harrow turned to Mary, whose ribbon glowed like starlight in the porch lantern's gleam. Young lady, I understand congratulations are in order. Deputy clerk is a fine position for someone with your gifts. Mary ducked her head modestly, but Eleanor could see her trying not to smile too widely. The child who had spent her life watching and remembering would now have the power to ensure that what she remembered was recorded in the official records, that justice left proper tracks for future generations to follow. They sat together on the porch as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Eleanor leaned against Josiah's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Mary curled up in the old rocking chair with a primer Judge Morrison had given her, already deep in study. "What will people say?" Eleanor asked quietly. Josiah's arm tightened around her. "They'll say what they've always said, at first. But words change meaning over time, and truth has a way of wearing down lies." From the fields came the sound of singing, the early workers beginning their day with the same freedom songs that had guided Eleanor and her companions through the storm. But now the voices carried different weights, sang from different hearts. The melodies were the same, but the meanings had shifted like river channels after a flood. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened to the hymns rising with the morning mist, carrying hope across water and land to places where other people waited for their own freedom papers, their own sealed promises of justice. The ring on her finger caught the first rays of sunlight, not her mother's private seal, but a simple silver band Josiah had fashioned from a coin Brother Samuel had blessed. It felt warm against her skin, weighted with promises they had made, not just to each other, but to the future they would build together. Mary looked up from her primer, her dark eyes bright with morning light. "Miss Eleanor? Josiah? There's something else we need to do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper, the freedom document from the Bible, properly sealed and witnessed, but still just one copy. Every free person needs their papers recorded at the courthouse, filed legal and proper. Otherwise, questions can come up later. Eleanor understood. The battle they had won in the storm was just the beginning. Real freedom required more than a single night's victory. It required the patient work of building new systems, new laws, new ways of living that honored the dignity of every person. "Then we'll ride to town this morning," she said firmly. "All of us together." Josiah nodded, his hand finding hers. Together. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist and revealing a landscape transformed by the night's storm, but not destroyed. New channels had been cut in the riverbank, old trees had fallen, debris had been washed away, but the land endured, ready to be planted with new seeds in new patterns. Eleanor stood, helping her father to his feet, while Josiah hitched the wagon and Mary gathered her few precious possessions. They would go to the courthouse as a family, unconventional, perhaps, but bound by something stronger than law or custom. As they climbed into the wagon, Eleanor looked back at the plantation one last time. The fields were the same, the buildings unchanged, but everything was different now. Freedom had come not as a thunderbolt, but as a slow turning of hearts, a gradual awakening of conscience, a child's perfect memory preserving songs of hope until the time came to sing them aloud. The wagon wheels rolled over muddy ground toward town, toward a courthouse where a young girl with a blue ribbon would help ensure that justice was recorded properly, where a freed man and his wife would register their marriage in the official books, where the slow work of changing the world would continue, one document at a time. Behind them, the plantation settled into its new rhythms. In the fields, workers sang as they had always sung, but now their voices carried the weight of wages earned rather than labor stolen, of choices made rather than orders obeyed. And on the porch of the big house, a lantern still hung from the eave where Eleanor had placed it, a signal that this was now a safe door, a place where freedom songs were welcome and where the Underground Railroad had found a new station, run by people who understood that justice delayed was not justice denied, only justice waiting for its time to bloom. Lantern steady, ribbon bright, the freedom paper's seal catching the last light of a world transformed by courage, love, and the perfect memory of a child who sang freedom songs until freedom sang back.